The gravel road ended where the map said it would, but the house was further back than the auction sheet had promised, hidden behind a wall of dead pines that leaned together one breath away from a scream. Rex was already out of the sidecar before I'd swung my leg over, his big German shepherd ears flat against his skull, his nose working the air in tight little circles. Not even the developers who usually swarm rural lots like flies on roadkill. $500 for a place the county had been trying to unload for almost 50 years. My chapter brothers had sheer in $20 bills and ridden out here alone with my dog because that's the kind of man the road makes you. But standing in that driveway, watching Rex pace in tight circles and refuse to look at the porch, I'll be honest with you. Stay with me on this one. The house was a two-story farmhouse, the kind they built in the 1890s when people still expected a home to outlive them. White paint that had gone the color of old teeth. A porch that sagged on the left side like a man. Nails bleeding rust down the siding in long brown stripes. The front door had a county notice stapled to it, the paper sun-bleached to the point you could barely read the warning, but somebody had also nailed a wooden cross above the lintel. Not a fancy cross, just two pieces of bone. I didn't like the look of that cross. In my experience, when somebody nails a cross to a door, they're not trying to keep people out. They're trying to keep something in. Rex wouldn't come up the porch steps with me. That was the second thing I didn't like. Reading with a chewed-up ear and a number tattooed in his thigh from whatever fighting ring he'd been bred for. He'd ridden with me to 30th States. He'd slept under my bike outside biker bars from Sturgis to Daytona. He'd faced down a black bear once outside a campsite in West Virginia and not given an inch. He wouldn't put a single paw on that porch. He sat down in the gravel and stared up at the second-floor windows, and I watched his lips peel back from his teeth in a slow, silent snarl, the kind he saved for things he couldn't see but knew were watching. I jimmied the lock with a flathead from my saddlebag. Hinges that screamed in three different pitches, and the smell rolled out of that house like a living thing, dust and old wood, and something underneath it I recognized from my time as a medic in the Marines. Before I tell you what we found. Her name was Margaret Calloway, the county records clerk. She'd called me 3 days after the auction, a voice on the phone like dry leaves, and she'd said, "You bought the Hannigan place." The next morning, Margaret pulled a manila folder out of a locked drawer in the back of the assessor's office, the kind of drawer that has things in it the official record doesn't. The Hannigan family had bought the farmhouse in 1968. Father, mother, two sons, one daughter. The father was a steelworker out of Bethlehem. Teacher. The boys were 12 and 14. The girl was 7. They'd been a normal family for 6 years. In the summer of 1974, all 5 of them disappeared on the same night. No signs of forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Dog, a collie, was found 3 days later sitting in the kitchen, refusing to leave, refusing to eat. The vet had to sedate the animal to get him out, and 6 weeks later that dog died of what they called a stress-induced cardiac event. A dog years, and then quietly closed. No bodies. No suspects. No ransom notes. The Hannigans had simply walked out of their own lives. The property had passed through 3 owners in the following decade, and none of them stayed more than a single winter. The last bedroom in 1987. After Vernon, nobody bought the place at all. The county had been trying to give it away ever since. Margaret told me there was a reason the cross above the door had stayed nailed and said, "Son, when you find out, you call me." Not the police. Me. And she closed the folder. I stood in the entryway that first afternoon and listened. That's something the road teaches you, how to listen to a place. A grandfather clock against the far wall had stopped at 3:47. Whose 3:47 I couldn't tell you. Either way, I wasn't going to be the one to wind it. Rex finally came inside about an hour after sundown, when I'd lit the kerosene lamp and laid out my bedroll in the living room. He came in low to the ground, belly almost dragging, ears back, eyes wide enough to show the whites. He pressed his shoulder against my leg and stayed there. That dog had ridden with me through hailstorms in Montana and biker bars where you don't let your dog out of your sight, and I'd never seen him afraid. Now he pocket of my cut and took out the .45 my old chapter president had given me when I'd patched in, and laid it next to my bedroll within easy reach. The first night, nothing happened I could put a name to. Just the house settling, the wind moving through the dead pines. But Rex never 3 a.m. at 4:30, and every time Rex was sitting upright next to my bedroll, staring at the kitchen door. Not the front door. The kitchen door. As if whatever he was watching for was already inside the house, and the only question was when it would come out. In the morning, I called my chapter brothers. I called Diesel first. He'd been my road captain for 15 years, and he was the one I trusted to tell me whether I was losing my mind. I told him everything. The cross above the door. Margaret's folder. Rex. We're coming. Don't go in the cellar. Don't go in the attic. I asked him how he knew there was a cellar. He said the kind of house that gets sold for $500 always has something in it. Diesel rolled in the next afternoon with 4 brothers, Tank, and his bottom rocker. The sound of those engines on the gravel road was the first sound that house had heard in a long time that wasn't trying to creep in sideways. Rex came alive when the bikes pulled up, tail high for the first time since we'd arrived. Dogs know their family. It's in the brush. 46 acres. Overgrown fields. A pond out back, black water, no fish. A family graveyard at the edge of the woods with 7 heads. Mary Pike, 1899 to 1962. May the Lord forgive what she could not. Preacher looked up at me and said, "Brother, what kind of epitaph is that?" We went back at sundown. Diesel had brought floodlights, a generator, crowbar was a job. We checked every room. 6 bedrooms with iron bed frames and rotted mattresses. A clawfoot tub stained brown from 40 years of dripping. A kitchen with a coal stove. A pan and a cellar accessed by a heavy oak door in the kitchen, sealed shut, with 12 iron bolts driven through the wood and into the frame from the outside. 12 bolts, hammered in by hand. Some rusted, some newer. Whatever was behind that door needed more iron between it and the world. Tank ran his hand over the bolts, He's the biggest man in our chapter, 6'6" and 300 pounds. Really didn't want it open from the inside, you mean? And he pointed at the bolts. They were all driven in from the kitchen side. From our side. Whatever was behind that door, it had been sealed in. Rex started to whine. Not bark. Whine. A low kind of sound a dog makes when he's been hurt and doesn't understand why. He was standing about 6 feet back from the cellar door, his head low, his tail tucked, and he was staring at the bottom of the door. No light coming through. No movement. Just darkness so complete it looked like a piece of black felt had been laid against the other side of the door. Let me be clear with you. I'm not a man who scares easy. I've done 2 tours in places. I know what death looks like and what evil looks like, and most of the time they look like nothing at all, normal men in normal rooms doing terrible things. But that cellar door was different. It was the first thing in my life I can honestly say felt wrong on a level that had nothing. Rex knew it, and the brothers knew it. None of us, in that moment, wanted to be the one to suggest we open it. It was Preacher who finally spoke. He said, "Brothers, we can leave right now and at me." He said, "This is your house. This is your call." I thought about Margaret Calloway's voice on the phone. I thought about the 5 Hannigans who had walked out of their lives in 1974. I thought about Vernon Pike hanging from a ceiling beam in 1987. Possible for him. I thought about my dog tags in my pocket, the ones I still carried even though my service was 20 years behind me, and what those tags meant. They meant you don't leave a job unfinished. You don't turn your back on a question because the answer might cost you. I took the bolt cutters from Diesel's hand and said, "We open it." It took almost 3 hours to get through those 12 bolts. Some were so rusted into the frame, we had to chisel out the wood around them. The last bolt was the original one, hammered in by hand back. Every one of us stepped back from the door at the same time. We didn't talk about it. We just stepped back. The door didn't open on its own. I want to make that clear. But the smell that came out from under it changed. It got stronger. It got more aware. Like, like something on the other side had been waiting for 40 years and had just now sat up. Diesel was the one who turned the handle. He gripped the iron handle, looked at me and said, "You ready, brother?" I said, "Yeah." He pulled. The cellar stairs were stone. Of stairs you find in farmhouses that were built on top of older foundations. They went down 12 steps and turned to the left, and after that we couldn't see anything because the air was thick with what looked like cobwebs but was something else, something heavier. Diesel shone down there was eating light. Rex wouldn't come down with us. That was the third thing I noticed, after the bolts and the smell and the dark. Rex, who had followed me into every other room of that house, sat at the top of the stairs and refused to descend. Down the stairs. He looked at me again. And then, I swear to you this happened, brother, he barked twice, sharp and loud, the way he barked when he was telling me a stranger was at the door. He was warning me. He was telling me there was somebody down there. Guns and crowbars, descending into a cellar that hadn't been opened in 40 years. The air got colder with every step. By the 4th step, My breath was fogging in the flashlight beam. By the 8th step, the cold was so intense it was. Before I tell you what we saw, I want you to come down those stairs with us. Flashlight in your hand. Dog barking behind you at the top. The cold cutting into your face. Because when you see it the way we saw it, you'll understand why none of us spoke for almost a full. On the bottom step and put his face in his hands. You'll understand why Preacher started to pray under his breath in a voice nobody had ever heard him use before. The cellar was a single large room, maybe 30 feet by 20 feet, with a packed dirt floor and stone walls. In the center of the room, an old wooden workbench, the kind a farmer would have used to repair tools or build small furniture. The workbench had not been used for those things. On the workbench were 5 sets of clothes, folded neatly, stacked in order of size. Pants, one larger, one smaller. And on top of the pile, a little girl's blue cotton dress with white flowers embroidered along the hem. Beside the clothes were 5 pairs of shoes, lined up in the same order of size. The man's work boots. The woman's pumps. Black patent leather Sunday shoes that would have fit a 7-year-old. And in front of the workbench, sitting in 5 wooden chairs arranged in a careful semicircle facing a single chair on the opposite side, were 5 things that took me almost a full minute to understand. 5 wooden chairs. And on each chair, a human skeleton. Father, mother, 2 sons, a daughter, all of them sitting upright. All of them facing the single 6th chair, which was empty. All of them with their hands folded in their laps. All of them with their skulls tilted slightly forward, as if they were listening to someone speaking from that empty chair across from them. The Hannigans had been down here the whole time. For 52 years. Sitting in a circle in a sealed cellar, listening to nothing. I want to stop here a moment. I've never seen anything that looked staged. Skeletons hadn't fallen there. They hadn't crawled there. They'd been arranged. Somebody had sat each one in a chair, folded their hands in their laps, turned their heads forward to face the empty 6th chair, then walked up those stairs and driven 12 bolts had been driven in from the kitchen side. So whoever arranged the skeletons had also been the one to seal the cellar afterward. They hadn't been trapped down here by an intruder. They'd been put here by somebody who walked back up alive and sealed the door behind them. Sir. Unless the 6th chair was who they'd been listening to. Preacher was praying out loud now, the way he prayed at funerals, slow and rhythmic. Tank still hadn't lifted his head. Ratchet, who's a quiet man on his best day, walked slowly. Stopped at the far wall and said, in a voice that was almost a whisper, "Brothers, you need to see this." We turned our lights toward him. The far wall of the cellar was covered in writing. Not graffiti. Not scratches. Writing. Lines and lines of careful, looping handwriting and covering every inch of the stone from the dirt floor to the wooden beams of the ceiling. The same phrase, written over and over and over again, thousands of times, in a hand that was sometimes neat and sometimes shook so badly the letters ran. I said, "He is still listening." Cody the prospect broke first. He turned and ran up those stairs 3 at a time and out the front door, and we heard his bike fire up 40 seconds later and tear off down the gravel road. He'd lose his patch for the of that night, might have been the one who ran. Diesel held it together. He said, "Brothers, we are not leaving these people down here. The Hannigans deserve to be buried in the daylight, with their names spoken by men who give a damn. We came down here to find an answer, and we found it. He looked at the dog tags I'd taken out of my pocket without realizing it. "You with me, brother?" I said, "Yeah. I'm with you." My word. Margaret answered on the second ring, even though it was after midnight. I told her what we'd found. She was quiet a long time. "You did a good thing tonight. You opened a door nobody else would open. You bring those people home." By 9 a.m. the next morning, the gravel driveway was full of vehicles. A pastor from the Methodist church. And this is the part that almost broke me, an old man in a brown suit, leaning on a cane. Walter Hannigan, the cousin who'd been 6 years old when his uncle and aunt and cousins disappeared in the summer of 1974. He'd spent 52 years not knowing. Diesel told him what we'd found, and the old man cried without making a sound, the way old men cry, with his shoulders shaking and his eyes never leaving the front door. We held a service in the family graveyard 3 days later. The county released the remains to Walter once dental records confirmed the identification. My chapter would ride pallbearers. I said yes before he finished the question. We carried 5 caskets that day. Tank carried the father. Diesel and Ratchet carried the mother. Preacher and else to bury was carried by Walter himself, a 78-year-old man in once, and the silence that followed was the cleanest silence I'd ever heard. The 6th chair was never explained. The state police took the workbench and the chairs and the clothes and the bones, but they never figured out who'd sat in that 6th chair, or who had ridden from the kitchen side and walked away. No fingerprints on the workbench. No footprints in the cellar dirt that didn't match ours. No DNA on the empty 6th chair. The lead investigator quietly told me 3 weeks later there was no evidence a 6th person had ever been in that. None of us wanted to ask out loud. If no one had been in that 6th chair, then who had the Hannigans been? Hammer or a brother's help, and the Hannigan house is none of those things. I'll tell you what I do know. I know that after we buried the family, the wooden cross over the front door fell off on its own. It just dropped to the porch one morning while Diesel and I were drinking coffee in the kitchen. Hit the boards with a soft sound and lay there, and we picked it up, and we burned it in the fire pit out back, because preacher said that whatever job that cross had been doing was a job that didn't need doing anymore. I know that Rex, who hadn't slept a full night in that house for the first week, an hour straight, his tail curled around his nose, his breathing slow and easy, like a dog who had finally finished a long shift of watching. I know that the air in the house changed after we buried them. I know that the smell that had been there when I first opened the front door, that wrong, organic, weighty dust and old wood and the kind of empty that means empty. I live in that house now, brother. I know how that sounds. But the Hannigans had been waiting 52 years for somebody to open the door. 52 years for somebody to bring them home. After we did that, it felt like a house that had been asked to do a hard job for a long time and had finally been allowed to rest. I fixed the porch myself last summer. I planted sunflowers along the driveway because Walter told me his cousin, the little girl in the blue dress, had loved Sarah Hannigan, 7 years old, loved sunflowers and cats, and a song called You Are My Sunshine her mother used to sing at bedtime. I planted 46 sunflowers, one for every acre, and they came up tall that first summer, and I'd swear on my very faint, very far away. Walter died last winter. Pneumonia in a nursing home in Allentown, 80 years old. He'd left instructions to be buried in the family graveyard, next to the cousins he'd finally gotten to bury. I dug the grave myself, with diesel and tank and preach. Cody had come back 6 months after he'd run and asked for his patch back, and the chapter had given it to him, because the chapter understands a man who runs once and comes back is a stronger brother than a man who never. The night after we buried the Hannigans, I went down into the cellar alone. Just me and the empty room and the writing on the wall. I walked down those 12 stone steps, stood in the middle of the cellar and listened. I didn't hear anything. No voice. No whisper. No cold. Just a room. A stone-walled room with charcoal writing on one wall I'd promised Margaret I would never paint over, and never have. He is still listening, the wall said. I think it was waiting for somebody who could finally answer it. A man with a dog in a cut and a debt to the road. I think it was waiting for me. Rex died this spring, brother. Old age in his sleep, on the kitchen floor of the Hannigan house, in his altar, because he'd earned a place there as much as anyone. I put his old collar and dog tags on the grave marker, and I sat on Walter's stone bench afterward and watched the sunflowers nod in the wind, and I thought about how a $500 farmhouse had given me a family I didn't know I needed, taken from me a story I would never have believed if I hadn't lived it. The road takes you to strange places. Sometimes it takes you to a dead-end driveway in Pennsylvania with a cross over the door and a dog refusing to climb the steps. Sometimes it asks you to open a door that 12. And sometimes when you finally open it, what you find isn't a horror. It's a family that's been waiting a long time for somebody brave enough to bring them home. So if you're listening to this, let me leave you with this. Don't be afraid. Waiting, because nobody had the courage to walk down 12 stone steps with a flashlight and ask. Ride safe. Keep your dog close. Trust your chapter. And if the road ever brings you to a place where the wind dies and the dog won't climb the porch, and a cross is nailed crooked above a brother, I'll bring the bolt cutters. We'll open it together. Because some doors are meant to be opened. And some families are meant to come home.